Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Meghan Conway from HomeBloom Ed on Instagram. Meghan is a former kindergarten teacher turned stay-at-home mom. She has three daughters, ages 6 and under, and she knows exactly what skills your child needs heading into kindergarten, both from a professional level as a kindergarten teacher, as well as a personal level, since she is a mom of a kindergartner. She knows exactly what she did to help prepare her child for school, and she talks about the minimum skills that she wanted her daughter to have heading into school, which I think you're going to find very helpful. Meghan and I also talk about her journey to becoming a teacher, as well as her transition into stay at home mom life and how she works with her own kids at home, because it's very different working with your own child at home than it is teaching a class full of students. If you have any questions about this episode, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at Littles Love Learning Blog. And you can also reach out to Meghan. She is on Instagram at homebloom.ed. I hope you find this episode valuable and helpful. Make sure you check the links below for all of Meghan's information, as well as a free resource that she's offering to all of my listeners. Hey, Meghan, thanks for joining the Littles Love Learning podcast.
Hi, Erin. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you
This
so
is
much.
going to be super fun. We connected on Instagram because we have very similar missions, helping
Yeah.
parents, supporting parents, especially of preschool age, so that their kids are ready for kindergarten. I
Yes.
also want to say we've connected because we're both Swifties, like major
Yes,
Swifties.
major Swifties. I got to see her last month in Portugal, and it was like top 3 things of my whole life. Probably
Oh,
wonderful.
I'm so jealous. I did get to see her, but we went on opening weekend of her
Oh,
tour.
wow.
So we didn't get all of the Tortured Poets Department songs the way you did. So I'm super
Yeah,
jealous.
that was a perk for sure. Waiting so
Oh
long.
my gosh. Well, let's start from the beginning so that listeners who are listening in can get to know you better, hear about your journey to becoming a teacher, and then now you've transitioned into being a stay-at-home mom. So I'd love to hear all of that.
So I wasn't originally planning to become a teacher. I went to school for psychology and biology, and my plan was to do something in that field, perhaps a school psychologist. I really wasn't sure. I took a year off of in between college and my master's eventually, and I had some experiences in the classroom that put me in it made me second guess my choices. I loved being directly in the classroom and I watched a lot of teachers interacting with the kids, and that was really my first time where I said, I think I need to pivot. I think I want to be directly in the classroom. So then I went back for my master's and got my master's in childhood and special ed. I wound up getting a wonderful job at a wonderful school in Brooklyn. I wound up working with some of my colleagues from my master's program, and it was just a really special couple of years. Um, and I worked fourth grade special ed. I was a team teacher. I was the special educator, and my partner was the general educator. And that was just the coolest thing. Like, I loved having a partner in the classroom. I loved fourth grade. We moved to New Jersey after I got married and moved to fourth and fifth grade special ed, a resource style classroom. And then from there, I moved to kindergarten, which is where I spent most of my years.
That is a big jump from fourth and fifth grade to kindergarten.
It was a huge jump. And I remember my first year in this school here in New Jersey, it was a long-term sub position. And I remember speaking to the administration saying, like, oh, I really would like first grade. I think that seems really cool. I did student teaching in first grade. And they're like, well, what about kindergarten? And it's like, oh, I am not so sure. But I remember those first like 8 weeks were just a wild, wild trip for me. Like, oh, I don't know what's harder to go up from kindergarten or to come down to kindergarten, but it was an adjustment for sure. But I fell in love with it. There is something really special about a kindergartner. So I loved it, and I didn't
I
look back,
totally
obviously.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's funny because when I first started teaching, I was teaching first and second grade. And that
Mhm.
jump from kindergarten to first grade is huge. It
Yeah.
is such a big jump. So when you are starting those beginning of the year kindergartners, it is a whole new world down there.
Yeah, it is. It is a wild. Those first couple of days, it's like you've seen like herding cats through the school. It's funny and
It is
endearing.
funny. Yes, they're the sweetest. What
They
did
are.
you find most challenging when you were working with those kindergartners?
I think they come in on such different levels. You have kids that they didn't go to preschool. And not only that they didn't go to preschool, but the exposure that they've had is very different from other kids. So there are kids that can read their name, write their name, they know all the letters, and I had a couple very fluent readers when I started teaching kindergarten. And then you have kids who are very far from that. And, you're going to teach them what they need to know, but it is a huge playing field, especially in the beginning of the year, and trying to meet those needs, while also meeting expectations. I think the expectations on teachers are crazy, time demands, as well as where they want you to have the kids and where you personally want to have the kids land. So I think that was hard. It's just you want to do so many different things with so many kids, in so very little time. I think that was the hardest part. And then
Absolutely.
just to add to that, getting the kids who really need the help. There's so many of them, and not everyone can get the help they need, which was hard.
That is heartbreaking. The
Hmm.
school system is not set up in a way that all kids are going to find success. And I think that's where you and I come in. And a lot of those of us, especially former educators who are now home, and we see
Mhm.
that gap between home and school. And
Yes.
there's so many ways the school system needs to be reformed. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, we're just trying to fill that gap and help support parents because we know that kids need that support.
Yes. 100%.
So now you are no longer full time in the classroom. You are home with your kiddos. So let's hear about
Yeah.
that transition.
Yes. So I think once I was that to go back a couple years, when I worked in New York, I was very young and teaching was my job, but also my hobby. So
Yes.
I was the first in the building. I stayed all evening. And I think I put a lot of my life to the side during those early years. I moved, I got married, and I said, let me dial this down a little bit so I can eventually grow my family and have a little bit more balance. I then had my first child, and I would leave before she was awake in the morning. And then I got pregnant with my second daughter, and at this time it was the pandemic, and I was virtually teaching, and that was a challenge. I had my second, and I kept extending that leave. And in that time, I was working with a couple families one on one to help them navigate everything going on at that time, and learning from home. And I said, you know what, I can do this on the side. Maybe I put teaching on hold for right now because I'm just not sure if I can give my best energy to my kids and like 18 to 20 other kids at the same time at this point. So I jumped in, or jumped out. I put in my resignation and I stayed home. I worked with some families. And then eventually, when my second was a little bit older, I added some virtual tutoring services to my plate. And I loved that. I thought virtual teaching was really hard, like teaching a classroom, but there was something about it I enjoy. I don't know. I thought I was pretty good with it and I enjoyed it. So, and a lot of families at this time were still looking for virtual support. So I did some homeschooling virtually. And then I was pregnant with my third, and tutoring 4 to 7 p.m. just no longer was the right option. So I'm no longer tutoring, but I'm still supporting in other ways, which is very fun.
Wow, what a journey. So when you were doing virtual school, was that kindergarten?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
It was very funny. It was like wild. And
It's so wild.
yeah, we had a very small house at this time, and it was just like my entire dining room was like no one else can go in there. I have everything everywhere. It was crazy. Um, and a lot of the parents would ask the same. They had so many questions, but they were so tired at the same time. It was just like, how can I help my kid? This isn't working. This isn't what I expected. Is this what it's like at school? This isn't feasible. And I just kept saying, no, it's not going to look like school. It's very different. And it was, like you said, that gap between home and school was so pronounced during that time. So
I think a
pronounced.
lot of parents had their eyes open during that time. We actually had a
Mhm.
pod with two other families during the pandemic. And so we would take turns going to each other's houses. Our kids
Mhm.
were all doing virtual school, but at
Yeah.
least they could be doing it together.
Together.
And two of the kids in our pod were in kindergarten. And so I could
Mhm.
see what their kindergarten teacher was doing with them virtually and the Zooms throughout the day and how they were supposed to
Yeah.
practice. And because of my experience, I knew how effective that was and how not effective that was, the different things they were doing, and so that was really hard. I think
Hard.
knowing what I knew and knowing that it wasn't going to be as effective as being in
Yeah.
school. And then at the same time, I was virtually teaching preschool,
Oh,
which was
wow.
a whole experience. But I will say, for me, it was different because mine was through Littles Love Learning. And so it was
Okay.
parents who wanted their kids
Wanted
in
it.
preschool. They signed up for it, they paid for it. Whereas it wasn't just a full preschool class with parents who were just kind of like, here, put my kid
Yep.
in preschool, like you take care of it. They were really involved. So I
Yeah.
had kind of a different experience than I'm sure you did, where you may have had some parents who were able to sit with their child during virtual
Right.
time and then some that could not. Yeah.
Yeah. I think luckily I had a wonderful class at that time and everyone was so patient and encouraging, but it was a crazy couple of months for
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
We should have counted how many times we had to say, "You're muted. You need to
Oh my
unmute."
gosh, I know. Just like I remember ending Zooms like, "All right, everyone take 30 seconds and just talk." And
Yes, yes.
it was funny.
Oh
Fun
my
times.
gosh. Yes, memories. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're not virtually tutoring or teaching online anymore, but you are still supporting parents through your business. So let's talk about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so I once I decided I couldn't tutor virtually anymore, I questioned. I'm on Instagram primarily, and I question like, do I enjoy this or do I not? And I think I said, yes, I do enjoy it. This is actually really fun. It's a good little hobby for me. So I decided to keep pursuing and putting out a lot of free content for parents to help them, to help bridge that gap between home and school. Primarily the younger age group. I had, my daughter just did kindergarten this year. And so what I was doing with her, I would share that online plus whatever, from my classroom experience. Then I started putting together some digital resources that I could share with parents, and that's kind of where I am now, supporting parents in the most flexible way that I can because I love teaching. I really do. However, while I can't physically do it right now, I still want to be helping parents. Um, I loved things like back to school night and parent teacher conferences. I loved hearing the parent side of things. I feel like you always get a funny story out of it, and B, um, they want to know how to help. And I loved that. So I kind of like to think about it as a parent teacher in your pocket, parent teacher conference in your pocket. So
Which is
that's
so
that's where I am
helpful.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, because we know as teachers, we're so busy. I remember when I was the long-term sub in kindergarten, and there were so many things I wanted to say to the parents, so many emails I wanted to send, so many trainings I wanted to give them.
Mhm.
And especially when you're a parent as well, by the time the school day is done and then you have your kids to take care of, and then you're planning for the next day, the time just slips away and you realize, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I never sent that email that I meant to send about how to teach heart words, how to practice this, how to
Mhm.
practice that. And it's not on the fault of the teacher. They have so much that they
So
are
much.
juggling. And so it is so nice to have resources like you where you
Mhm.
can step in and kind of give those tips and strategies to parents. Even though you're
Mhm.
not their child's teacher, you can
Mhm.
still support them.
Yeah, absolutely. I It's fun. It really is.
Yeah.
I love it. I love doing it. Mhm.
And you mentioned that your daughter just wrapped up kindergarten this year. So I'd love to
Yes.
go back to before she headed to kindergarten and give
Mhm.
some tips or strategies that you use to help prepare her for kindergarten
Yeah,
so that if parents are listening and their little one's heading to kindergarten this fall, maybe they could use some of these tips at home.
absolutely. So I will say that as a kindergarten teacher, I kind of had this vision in my mind about how I would teach my daughter to read and that she would open up to me and we'd sit down and have these lovely times together where we're reading books and doing. It was not like that at all. She is a passionate little girly, and I needed to adjust how I worked with her. So that was one thing, and I can come back to that. But with her, because she was so passionate, I primarily focused on, and still do, emotional regulation with her because I think that's such a crucial thing for a preschooler jumping into kindergarten where there may be a lot of one-on-one support in preschool to manage a lot of these big feelings, or mom, whoever. And then kindergarten, there is more opportunity for frustration and disappointments and transition. So that's where we put a lot of work. Um, and then I think some other things we focused on with her was fine motor. I was always, as a kindergarten teacher, in the beginning of the year, like, oh my goodness, these kiddos are not ready to hold pencils and do all the things we expect from them. So a lot of fine motor, and that's just fun to do. Like my kids love to bead and all that stuff. And then at a minimum, I wanted her to read her name, spell her name, write her name, and I wanted her to know her letters, like forward and backward. Those were the bare minimums for me to give her like a strong footing on this journey.
And was she able to do all those things?
Yes, she was.
Yay.
Yes. And like I said earlier, she wasn't always super eager about sitting down to work with me to do the reading. And I think that's where I found myself feeling frustrated. And I had to check myself and say, okay, this isn't going to go how you expected it to go. So how can we pivot? And so I made things shorter. Like we would work together for like 5 minutes at a time and at the same time every day. So it was less of like all right, today we'll do it. And then we'll do it in a couple days. Or when you feel like it, let's do it. We just kind of pushed through it and tried to put some muscle memory behind it. So she knew at these times we were working together. And a lot of movement. We implemented a lot of movement with anything we did for her, and she got there. She's now reading and writing. Her second day of summer, she came home and said, "I want to write in my journal and do some reading." And I was like, "This doesn't sound like you." And she really like she loves learning, but she can be resistant at home. But that was really fun to hear that she wanted to go do some reading and writing because she missed school, and it made me feel like, okay, we're okay. We
We
did
did
okay.
it.
Yeah, we did it.
That's so exciting. Now, did she
Yeah,
go to preschool outside the home or just
she
preschool in the
did.
home?
Yes. With I think a 2 year gap. I was teaching at the time, like when she was really young. So she went to a daycare, and then took, I guess, a year and a half off during, all that crazy. And then she went back for 2 years to a preschool. And she had a really
Before.
great experience and struggled a little bit with transition. So I was a little nervous about jumping from a very small preschool to a public school kindergarten situation. So I was really anxious about the transition as a mom and former teacher. But she really rose to the occasion. I think she needed um, all that busy. I think really helped her.
How many kids were in her class this year?
18. Mm,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
It's bigger,
but
but
she had a
that's
lovely
still
teacher. Her
pretty
teacher was
small.
the best. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, not
Yeah.
wildly big. Mhm.
Now, I love how you mentioned earlier, though, that transition from preschool to kindergarten with the emotional regulation is so important
Mhm.
because 18 kids is a lot more than maybe some kids have in preschool. Or if you have a lot of kids in preschool, you probably have a lot more adults because the
Yeah.
ratio of adults to kids is smaller. I know when my
Yes.
son was in pre K, they had 25 kids in their class, but they had four adults. So they were
Okay.
basically like small
Yeah,
groups the whole time.
that's
Whereas then
great.
he transitioned to kindergarten with 22 kids in his class with one adult
One adult.
and barely any volunteers, no aides. And so it is a very big difference that even if you have a lot of kids in your class, how many adults are helping you work through that
Yeah.
frustration? And if they aren't there, you need to have those strategies and tools. So I love that you focused on that with her.
Yeah. And even today, like that stuff doesn't end. She does a small camp in our town, and she came home today saying she never ate her snack because she was she saw some other kids go get snack, but then she felt too shy to ask for the snack. And that's one of those things I remember as a kindergarten teacher during the first week, so many kids were too nervous to say, I need a drink of water, or I forget where the bathroom is. Can you show me? So just teaching the little things like that, like, you can ask the teacher, let's practice raising our hand. Things, they need to be reminded that it's okay, and um, self advocate.
Yes, that advocacy part is so important.
Hmm.
Now, your daughter went to preschool, but you still felt it was your responsibility to help prepare her for kindergarten. And I wanted to talk about that because I see this myth floating around that if your child attended preschool, you're good. You can send them to kindergarten and you don't really have to worry because they're already prepared for kindergarten because they went to preschool. And I would just love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that definitely is a message going around. And I think whether you send your child to preschool or not, it really is your role to communicate that education and learning are home values as well. I think when you send your child to preschool, they are obviously going to learn so much. They're going to get that social piece. But when they come home and you reinforce everything that they're doing, all the learning, and I don't necessarily mean letters and numbers, but also the social dynamic learning, the regulation, all of that, when you reinforce it at home, that's that transfer piece that, you learn a lot about. It's transferring from school to home. And we don't send our kids to school for straight A's and to go to college. Those things are great. However, I think we send our school kids to school because we want them to be lifelong learners and critical thinkers. And when we are transferring from home to school, that's where you see that lifelong love of learning, because it's not just in this little bubble called school. It's at home too. You're learning, you're questioning, you're playing is learning, but how can you push them a little bit further? How can you help them do more? And I think there's a confidence in that too. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And seeing your parents value what you're doing at school and talking to you about it at home, I think is so important. And like you mentioned, play is learning, but we have child directed play and we also have some guided play when the adult can
Yep.
help guide them and kind of expose them to different areas of play. I think that is so important too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they love it. Like, kids love learning. And I think when we just stop at letting them play independently, I think we take one of their natural tendencies away from them, where they get to expand on that, and they can they can do so much more than you think they can. And that's exciting.
I do. I say that a lot because when people push back on me and say, "Why are you teaching kids so young? Just let them play." They think that when they're learning, they are playing because they should be playing. It's only us adults who have put this kind of negative connotation on learning. And this,
Mhm.
oh, if you're teaching them letters, you're pushing them too far, too fast. Kids don't know that. They just think they're playing and having fun. And so I think it really comes from the adult experience. Maybe they had a negative experience in school
Yeah.
or saw something that kind of gave them that impression. But if we're just talking with kids, they love to learn. They are little sponges. And so when we can help them do that through play, it's such a win-win, I think.
Yeah, and I think to expand on that a little bit, a lot of parents will just think about kindergarten like, oh, they're so little. We also need to remember that what's happening in preschool and kindergarten has so many lasting effects. And if you are so involved that you notice any red flags early on, the earlier you're working with them, the earlier you can advocate for these red flags. And early in the year in kindergarten, those kindergartners aren't going to be top priority necessarily for caseworkers. And I think when you can come in with a lot of knowledge about your child and their learning and any red flags you see, that's going to help you so much to advocate for them if they have other needs that need to be addressed.
That is such a good point, especially like you said, the schools are focused on other grade levels and they think incoming kindergartners usually get the last they're not really focused on. And so if you as a parent are coming in and saying, "I've been working with my child for 2 years on letters and sounds and it's not clicking. Something's not right. I would like them to be tested. I would like intervention. I would like this." You can be that advocate for your child. That's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, because you might even hear in response, like, oh, give them some time. We don't assess this till, if you have a gut feeling, you are allowed to request. And I always tell parents that, like, if you are the parent, keep pushing. Don't let someone discourage you from advocating for your child.
Yes, and that can be hard for some parents,
It's really
especially those of
hard.
us who were, raised to be people pleasers or good
Yes,
girls, especially for the moms who don't want to rock the boat and you don't want a negative relationship with your child's school or
yeah,
teacher. So maybe you feel a little bit hesitant, but I love that because
absolutely.
you can do it in a respectful way and you're doing it in a way to help support your child. And ultimately, in 10 years, it's not going to matter what the kindergarten teacher thought of you if they thought you were a little
Yep.
pushy or a little this or that. What matters is that your child got the help that they needed.
Yeah, and I always say to parents to, like, start off the year with a friendly email,
Yes.
and just put, communicate that you're on the same team. That way, harder conversations are a little bit easier down the road because you've had that first communication.
That's such a good point. To start off the year with that good relationship because we know
Yeah.
teachers are human and
Yep.
they have so much on their plates. And so we also know that we don't know what's going on in their personal lives. They could have a lot of things going on as well. So we're just
Absolutely.
giving empathy to everyone. And I think
Yep.
that is the most important piece.
Yes, teamwork.
Yes. Now, why don't you talk to me a little bit about your kindergarten readiness checklist that you have available to parents and how that can help them get their child ready for kindergarten this fall?
Yes, absolutely. So that came about because I wanted a reference sheet. I have a daughter that is now 3 and she is like 2 days before the kindergarten cutoff, and I know a lot of parents are in that boat too. Like, what do I do? So I thought it would be really nice for parents to have this sheet of kindergarten readiness skills that a lot of kindergarten teachers look for in their students when they enter kindergarten. This checklist isn't the end all be all. It's not to say my child needs to ace this whole thing before I send them to kindergarten, but it's like a guiding light, your yellow brick road towards, okay, these are the things my child is really strong with, really confident at, but to get them to that next level, here are some things I can focus on. And you can just take some literacy skills you want to focus on for a little while, and maybe a math or a fine motor skill, um, independent life skills, and make a little action plan for yourself, and then reassess a month later. And how are we doing? You don't need to turn it into a full schooling curriculum, but just as, throw it on the fridge and check in because like we said earlier, your role is to really be like head coach in their learning journey. And that's where that came from.
That's so great. I will link to that below so that parents can have access to that. And I love how you
Awesome.
said just put it on the fridge. Sometimes I think you just need to be top of mind.
Yeah.
Parents, we have the best of intentions. We want to do these things with our child. And then a week goes by and we're like, oh,
Mhm.
wait, I never actually sat down and
Yeah.
worked with them on this or talked to them about
Yeah.
that. So keep it in a place where you can see it and it will just remind you.
Yeah. Consistency matters a little bit at a time, but consistency matters.
Yes, totally agree. Well, as we are wrapping up our time together, what is the biggest takeaway that you hope listeners will get from this episode?
I think that parents need to be reminded that they know their children better than anyone, and for that reason you are in the best position to be their teacher, be their just their light, and they are more capable. Not They didn't have the credentials. Maybe you didn't go to school to become a teacher. However, you know them better than anyone, and so you can use that to your advantage when teaching them. And it is such a joy to watch your children grow because of what you are doing for them and with them.
It's the best feeling in the world. I wish every
Mhm.
parent could experience that feeling. It really is awesome.
Absolutely. It's the best.
Now, this is called the Little Stuff Learning Podcast. So I would love to know, what do you love most about working with littles?
What I love most about working with littles is that they challenge me to think about things differently. I think when I come into something with a vision and an expectation, which is very typical, and I put it in front of either one of my daughters, they will both take the same thing and do completely different things, both of which are completely different than the expectation I had. And just the way that little kids interpret and process their learning is the best. Um, So I think that's another piece of advice. Stop and listen to them really, because sometimes what doesn't make sense to you at first, it's them processing in a very different way, and you can take that and run with it. So just the way that they process things is awesome, and watching those little light bulbs click.
That's such a great answer. And it's so true. I'm thinking about my own two kids and how they think about things so differently or they approach situations so
Mhm.
differently, and letting them be their own people, not
Yeah.
trying to control or dictate how they approach those
Mhm.
situations, just kind of watching and observing and helping them work through frustrations or
Yeah.
disappointments,
Yeah.
but kind of seeing how they approach it. I love that advice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I can go into things with a very strong picture in my mind, and if it doesn't, I have to just let it go. Let it go.
Yes.
It's okay if it doesn't go the way you want. Let it go. They're still learning.
That's
Mhm.
my favorite part about process art also. It's
Yes.
just kind of seeing how they run with it and what
Mhm.
there's no perfect outcome at the end. It's just kind of seeing what they do with it. It's really fun.
Yes. Yes. Or even when a craft goes awry, it's like, okay, they're doing their own thing, and that's great.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for your time today. I know the listeners
Thank
got a lot
you.
of value out of this. Let them know where they can find you online and connect with you.
Thank you, Erin. This was so much fun. I love chatting with you. Um, I'm primarily on Instagram at homebloom.ed.
Perfect. I will link to
Ed for
that in
education.
the show
Thank
notes.
you.
Yes. Home Bloom Education. I love that.
Yes.
I will link to your Instagram and also your kindergarten readiness checklist if anybody is interested. I know you also have a pre K power pack. Is that correct?
Yes, that is a bundle of resources that are a great starting point if you want to work with your child a little bit more at home and you are not sure how to begin. This has a great mix of resources that you can use to support early literacy skills, fine motor skills, early math skills, and even some emotional regulation skills like coping strategies and feelings identification, things like that. So you can also grab that via my Instagram.
Okay. I will make sure that everybody has all of those links. Thank you
Mhm.
again for your time. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you post next on Instagram.
Thank you so much, Erin.